Well, let's look at this a bit further now and find out what this does mean for the Conservative Party, the different wings of it, and for the right of British politics. I'm joined by Ryan Shorthouse, Executive Chair at the think tank Bright Blue. Good afternoon to you, Ryan. We've heard there from Victoria Atkins and from Kemi Badenoch about taking the fight to Labour. Do you think the fight within is done, though?
Well, this was one of the closest leadership contests we've seen for some time, and it was a lower turnout in terms of the proportion of members voting. But I think, you saw this at Conservative Party conference in October last month, early October. There's a feeling that the Tories are still in the game. So despite having a massive bruising election defeat back in the summer, there was a feeling that they didn't drop below 100 seats. So there was still, the official opposition distinct from the Lib Dems. But also there's a feeling that Labour haven't really done that well, particularly since August. And the budget as well, the markets have not reacted that well. The official forecasts seem to suggest living standards and growth are not really going to pick up. So there's a sense from the Tories that they can win in 2029. So I think there's a feeling now that a lot of them will be like, okay, we've had the contest, let's get behind Kemi and take the fight to Labour. So I think there is, interestingly, a lot of enthusiasm amongst Conservative MPs and activists. But, I think they need to be slightly careful because the electorate did give quite a damning verdict in the summer. And even if Labour loses support, it doesn't necessarily mean people will return back to the Tories.
Over the last few years, of course, we have seen this temptation among MPs to talk and to fight among themselves. Do you think they are ready to take that conversation to the British people, or has Kemi Badenoch got a lot more work to do to sort of settle a lot of those internal arguments? No,
I think they will be focused on Labour now. And I think, what's interesting about Kemi is that she's quite an intellectually curious and confident person. And a lot of the views that she arrives at comes, I think, from first principles rather than, say, what's fashionable or what the polls say. So actually, I think you're going to have a Conservative opposition now, which is going to be more confident, challenging, robust, not scared to say things which are, perhaps some other politicians fear saying. I think there'll be a kind of more robustness to the Conservative opposition, a belief in those kind of foundational principles like, we shouldn't borrow as much, the state should be smaller, we should tax less. I think a kind of confident assertion of those values will become much clearer under Kemi. And, you've seen throughout this contest and before, she's somebody who is willing to speak her mind. And I think the question is whether people feel that that is too much and is on the verge of being rude, or they respect somebody who has clear principles and is not afraid to defend them. So, I think it's a bit of a gamble to go with Kemi, but I think the Conservatives do need the attention that she will bring and the kind of intellectual confidence that she will bring.
At the last election, the party lost support to the left, the Liberal Democrats to the right, and Reform UK. So if you can see the skipper's hand on the tiller, do you see it gently tacking to the right or to the left?
I think that's a simplistic way of putting it. I think there'll be a kind of defence of Conservative values from first principles across different areas. Now, what I think, though, with Kemi is that she's particularly interested in cultural policy. So she's interested in things like kind of ethnicity, race, gender identity. She's been quite robust on that. She'll be quite interested, I think, on immigration and integration policy. So there'll be a lot of focus on cultural stuff, and what you might deem to be a kind of more robust right-wing position, I think it's more of a kind of individualist position on these things.
Are people concerned about cultural issues, though? Don't they concern more about economic matters and the health service?
Yeah, no, I think so. I'm saying that about Kemi, and I think the kind of Achilles heel there is that she may focus too much on those cultural things like immigration, integration, gender, ethnicity, when actually, the verdict from the last election was very much, the economic model that the Tories have kind of managed over the past 14 years has just not worked. Private incomes have not grown, public services have not really improved. That was the verdict, and the evidence was quite clear that things had been quite stagnant. So I think her blind spot actually is not having as much on economic policy, and she really needs to develop a coherent position and a compelling vision on the economy, because after all, I think that's why the Tories lost, because people felt that the economic model wasn't working. So she needs to develop a critique of that Conservative period. Of course, there were some positives, but on the whole, it didn't really work out, and then come up with an alternative prospectus to the trajectory that Labour is taking the country on, which frankly I'm worried about, because it does seem that we're being asked to pay more taxes, to borrow more, and not really get higher growth and higher living standards by the end of this decade. So, there's a chance there, but she needs to make sure that she focuses on a compelling and a coherent economic prospectus from the Tories, which the public are convinced by.
Ryan, when we look at history, whether it's Labour or the Conservatives, after an election defeat, so often the leader that first takes over the party is not the one that leads them back into government. So she's got a tough, long path ahead of her, hasn't she?
She has. Actually, that's more of a recent phenomenon. Most Conservative leaders have become prime ministers in the 20th century. It's certainly the case in the 21st century, when you had people like William Hague, Ian Duncan Smith, Michael Howard. It was obviously, there was a long period in the post-1997 period, what a lot of Conservatives talk about, the wilderness years, until they got elected with David Cameron in 2010. In recent history, yes, but actually, if you look, particularly since the war, actually, a lot of Conservative leaders do find themselves as Prime Minister. But we don't know what's going to happen now. And you are right to say it's a long uphill struggle, because the election defeat that they had in July is one of the worst that they've ever had. And there's a lot of, obviously, disillusionment with the Conservative government and what they delivered in that period. So it is a long road, and even if people are being angry with Labour, we shouldn't just assume that support will go to the Tories. They may be looking at other parties, in particular reform. So yes, it is a long uphill battle. But at the moment, and I think MPs got this, and activists got this, and perhaps why they voted for Kemi over Robert, because Kemi actually didn't have a developed policy prospectus. It was much more a kind of articulation of what conservatism stands for from first principles, whereas Robert had a much more developed policy prospectus. And to be honest, I just don't think the public are in a position at the moment to be listening in detail to what the Tories are offering on policy. It's more about what it stands for and their overall principles. So I think Kemi has got that right. And we don't know where we're going to be in 5 years in terms of, where we are in terms of our fiscal position, the economy. So developing a really robust and detailed policy prospectus now is probably not what is needed. Instead, it's what does conservatism mean? What are the kind of key principles and values? And I think Kemi will lean into that over the next couple of years to show some real division with what Labour stands for.
Okay, Ryan, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us. Ryan Shorthouse there from the think tank Bright Blue. Good to have your company.